Welcome to those of you who are just joining. We are going to give it a couple minutes for others to join before we get started, so please sit tight. Okay, well, why don't we get started? It's just after 6:30. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the virtual public meeting for the Town of Oakville Stormwater Fee Feasibility Study. Thank you so much for taking the time to participate. Today is an opportunity to introduce you to the study and, of course, answer your questions. My name is Alicia Evans. I am a facilitator with ACOM, and I will be your moderator. Oakville, as we know it today, is rich in the history and modern traditions of many First Nations. From the lands of the Anishinaabe to the Attawandaron and Haudenosaunee, these lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in First Nations history. As we gather today on the sacred lands of Treaties 14 and 22, we are in solidarity with Indigenous brothers and sisters to honor and respect Mother Earth, the original nations of the trees and plants, the four-legged, the flyers, the finned, and the crawlers as the original stewards of Mother Earth. We acknowledge and give gratitude to the waters as being life and being sacred, and to the carriers of those water teachings, the females. We acknowledge and give gratitude for the wisdom of the grandfathers and the four winds that carry the spirits of our ancestors that walked this land before us. The town of Oakville is located on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the treaty holders, for being stewards of this traditional territory. So there are a few things that I just want to run through quickly before we get started on the agenda tonight. So as you can see, we are using Zoom's webinar platform. So in this platform, all attendees are muted and you will not have access to your video. So this means that we will invite your participation through the Q&A box. So you can access this feature through the menu bar by hovering your mouse over the screen. If you're using a computer. And if you are using a smartphone or tablet, you can just simply tap on the screen and that feature should pop up. So no other attendees will be able to see the questions, and there's also an option to submit questions anonymously to the project team. Now, we know that technological issues can and do happen, so we appreciate your patience with us if anything happens. And of course, if you're having any issues as well, please use the Q&A box to ask for help. Dylan will monitor this throughout the meeting and do his best to help you out. Now, finally, the webinar is also being recorded, and the Q&A will remain anonymous to avoid any privacy concerns. So as I mentioned, the purpose of the meeting today is to introduce the Stormwater Fee Feasibility Study and answer your questions. So following this introduction, there will be an overview presentation that introduces stormwater and stormwater management, including the town's 30-year stormwater management needs. The team will present why the town needs to consider new ways to pay for stormwater management and how the Stormwater Fee Feasibility Study will help to identify a recommendation. The team will outline the different funding options under consideration and how those options could affect residential and non-residential property owners. And the team will also provide information about different incentive programs for property owners that implement good stormwater management practices. And finally, the team will share how Oakville residents and property owners can participate in the study. And following this presentation, we will address your questions. Please feel free to add your questions to the Q&A box throughout the meeting, but we will hold off on responding to them until after the presentation. We also have about 90 minutes available for the meeting today, so hopefully that will give plenty of time for you to have your questions answered. So we have a number of people participating this evening from the town of Oakville who are here to present and to answer your questions. So we have Catherine Hewitson, who is the Director of Asset Management, Jonathan Vanderheiden, Deputy Treasurer and Director of Finance, Paul Allen from Infrastructure and Asset Management Planning, and Phoebe Fu, Community Infrastructure Commissioner. The town has also engaged AECOM to help complete the study. And so from AECOM, we have Pippi Warburton, who is the project manager. And I will now turn it over to Pippi to kick off the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Alicia. It's great to be here with everyone here tonight. So we're going to start with the basics. What is stormwater? And sometimes I like to start by explaining that stormwater is not wastewater, it's not sewage, and it's not drinking water. Stormwater is water that comes from rain and melted snow and travels across the land into the ditches and drains and creeks and lakes. Infiltration is something that we talk a lot about in these studies. So infiltration is that process where the water soaks into the earth, into the soil, in those natural landscapes. So it allows for that natural landscapes allow for that high infiltration rate, whereas hard surfaces or those built landscapes, parking lots and paved areas, the water flows off much more quickly. Next slide. So what is stormwater runoff? So stormwater runoff comes more quickly, like I was saying, from those built up landscapes, the impervious areas, roofs, asphalt, concrete, pavers, and it tends to have more pollutants along with it. So that oil and grit that comes from roads and parking lot comes off more from those impervious areas as well. So if you have a high impervious areas, it's more likely you'll have flash flooding and that very peaky high flooding situations. Next slide. So I think we all know what happens when stormwater isn't managed correctly. And the town does a great job of managing the infrastructure on your behalf. So we see things like erosion along our creeks and ditches and channels. That's often caused by more frequent flooding, not necessarily the bigger floods, but more frequent flows cause erosion that needs to be maintained and managed and monitored. There's debris in creeks and inlets and ditches. So the town goes out before a big storm is forecast to make sure that the main inlets are clear and clears debris from the creeks and the channels as well. The town also does a great job of monitoring pollutants in the creeks and the lakes and stays on top of any potential spills that are coming out and investigates them accordingly. Of course, road flooding, the roads are designed to convey flows in a major storm event, but they should drain down quite quickly. So they keep an eye out for unusual road flooding that might turn into property damage or be caused by blocked inlets. And then you have surcharge systems, basement flooding that can happen, and failed infrastructure that hasn't been replaced. We call a catastrophic culvert failure, something that, really a stitch in time can save 9 in these situations where good maintenance means you pay less in the long run. Next slide. So Oakville has an enormous amount of stormwater assets, and I think this slide really does a good job of explaining and putting it in perspective. So the one that I like to sort of show off is that the ditches and storm sewers, if we put them end to end, all the ditches and storm sewers in the town of Oakville, it would go all the way from Oakville to Quebec City. So it's an enormous distance. You also have lots of creeks. You've got over 8 kilometers of shoreline, over 30,000 catch basins that need to be cleaned and monitored, 67 stormwater management ponds, and the total value is approximately $963 million. And I think that sometimes blows people's minds, but the town has an enormous responsibility to maintain and maintain and operate all of that infrastructure on your behalf. So some of the things that the Stormwater Services Group is doing at the town would be asset management planning. So keeping track of how many assets you have, where they are, how often they've been inspected, how often they need to be replaced, wear and tear, and having good asset management planning. Assessments of flood risk and asset conditions and audits. So how full your stormwater ponds needs to be checked. Are they full of sediment? Do they need to be cleaned out in order to function properly? Infrastructure inspections and cleaning, repairs, infrastructure renewals and upgrades, climate resiliency improvements, emergency response programs for breakages and spills, and then monitoring the flow, the quantity and the quality and erosion is all monitored throughout the town. Program the stormwater team oversees is repairing and renewing of the system. So the storm sewer system and the culverts, monitoring and rehabilitating creeks and channels, and the shoreline, of course, as well, of the lake. They're cleaning out sediment from the stormwater management ponds. They're maintaining the bioswales and the natural channels and the irrigation pits for the trees. And they implement solutions to protect floodplain areas along various creeks. The ditches need to be cleaned out and renewed and improved throughout the Oakville's neighborhoods. And improvements to Oakville and Bronte Harbor shorelines are also considered regularly. I'm going to turn this back over to Catherine now to talk about the impacts of climate change.
Catherine, you're on mute.
Oh, thank you. Can go to the next slide. So we've all heard a lot about climate change. So Oakville, and partnering with the city of Burlington, did do some research a couple of years back to look into Oakville's climate change projections. And I think it's no big surprise that we are seeing a lot warmer and wetter and also windier climate in the past few years. And particularly, I think this summer for sure, we saw really high temperatures for long periods of times. And then also those heavy precipitation days as well that really are impacting a lot of the stormwater infrastructure and our residents in town. So these are just a few climate-related impacts that we have seen over the past number of years. We had really heavy ice storm in 2013, really high, heavy rainstorms with resulting in really high lake levels that impacted a lot of the shoreline in 2017, as well as in 2019, and then again, most recently, just this summer. Next. So what does this mean for our stormwater infrastructure? So there are a number of different risks that climate change can impact, not only our infrastructure, but our natural assets as well. The most typical one, we can see storm sewer backups and overtopping of the roads. I think we experienced a number of road closures this past summer. The extreme heat can cause crackling and buckling of the road infrastructure. This leads to a number of damage and service interruptions caused by flooding and erosion along the creek beds. The one thing that we don't always think about is the water quality. These really high temperatures and the downstream impact can cause harmful algae blooms and carry pollutants down into the creeks and as well as into the lakefront. So as you can see, there's a number of different risks related to the climate impacts on our stormwater infrastructure. So over the past number of months, the town has been exploring options for a sustainable funding source to ensure that our stormwater infrastructure is maintained in a good state of repair, and also that improvements are made to adapt to climate change. The objectives of the funding source is to find one that's equitable, simple to understand, as well provide the financial sustainability that we need. Staff first introduced the Rainwater Management Plan to Council in March of 2023 when we presented the townwide Rainwater Management Plan roadmap. The intent of this Rainwater Management Financial Plan is to take a look and review all of our stormwater infrastructure needs. So not just looking at stormwater pipes or looking at creeks and the ways to mitigate flooding, but to look at all of our needs and develop a long-term plan. So by doing that, we applied sort of a risk, cost, benefit, and service impact lens to all of our stormwater needs to develop a long-term prioritized plan. And as part of that, trying to develop the supporting financial plan. Sorry, next. So okay. So the Rainwater Management Plan is a multi-phase plan, and it builds on previously completed studies and assessments to provide an integrated approach to planning and implementing our stormwater infrastructure needs into the future. The objective being to review the variety of the competing needs and apply that cost-benefit analysis. So as I mentioned, the project involved 3 phases. The first one was to just identify all those needs across those various different types of assets, the ponds, the creeks, the shoreline, the storm pipes, the catch basins, and just understand what the total value of infrastructure needs into the future would be. And the second phase really involved looking at that risk and cost benefit to prioritize all the different projects and recommendations to create a long-term 30-year plan. So we've to date taken 3 reports to council, one in March 2023, July 2023, and September 2023. As well, we've also had 2 council workshops to talk about this stormwater feasibility study in June 2024, and then just one recently in September. So we're now in phase 3 of the Rainwater Management Financial Plan, which is really developing that fee feasibility study and developing what the different options are we can look at to find that sustainable funding source. So lastly, just want to wrap up my end of the presentation by talking about what those 30-year stormwater needs entail. So based on the work that we did in phase 1, we've realized there's really 2 distinct streams of needs for our infrastructure. The one category is the ongoing life cycle needs. And this represents the maintenance inspections, as well as those ongoing renewal and replacement of the existing infrastructure to ensure that we are maintaining and protecting the stormwater network as it is and continues to function properly and do its job. The second group of projects and work that we have are more related to climate adaptation. It's looking at the various recommendations from recent flood risk assessment studies that have been completed and understanding the impacts of those more intense storm events or higher lake levels and identifying the opportunities and improvements that we need to make to adapt to climate change. As you can see, Stream 1 totals $351 million, which averages about 11.7 million per year. And the second stream of work totals 365 million or 12.2 million per year on average. And when we combine those together, on average, we need $24 million per year, or a total of 732 million over the 30 years.
Thanks, Catherine. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about how we currently pay for the stormwater program in Oakville. Next slide. So currently, the stormwater program is paid for through municipal taxes collected by the town. Municipal tax, as you know, is based on assessed value of the property. So it really has nothing to do with how much runoff comes from a property. You could have a very paved area that's worth not very valuable, but it contributes a lot of runoff, and also vice versa. So currently, the town takes about 4% of the total taxes collected, and that goes towards the town's stormwater program. And there's always competition for taxes in the budgets every year, as I'm sure you're aware. So this means that residential properties are contributing over 70% of the total taxes collected. So therefore, their residential properties are contributing over 70% of the finance to pay for the stormwater infrastructure in the town of Oakville. So non-residential properties, those are the commercial, industrial areas, they're just paying a little over 27% of the tax collected is coming from the non-residential properties. So if we look at the next slide, we look at the division of non-residential and residential based on the runoff area. So the runoff area is a good way of estimating how much runoff comes from a property. So we take the area of the property and we multiply it by a runoff coefficient, which dictates sort of how impervious or pervious these properties are on average. So that runoff area is a good indicator of how much runoff is coming from a property. And we can see it's quite different. So for the non-residential properties, even though they might be less value as far as assessed value, they have a much bigger contribution of runoff coming from those properties. So 56% of the runoff is estimated coming from the non-residential properties, where the residential properties are really only contributing about 44% to the stormwater system. So this segues quite well into why we started looking at a stormwater fee feasibility study in Oakville. Next slide. Decided to review its current funding model through property taxes and explore new ways to fund stormwater and support climate change resiliency. And this is very common throughout Ontario and all across Canada, and in fact, North America. A lot of municipalities have already switched to a stormwater funding mechanisms other than taxes. And in Oakville, this was first mentioned through the Stormwater Management Master Plan and the Rainwater Management Financial Plan. So this has been a while in the making. So why are they considering new ways to pay for it in Oakville? Well, as we saw on those pie graphs, this current system paying through taxes is not really fair or equitable, and it's not enough. So this will ensure that Oakville adheres to the Ontario regulation regarding asset management and planning for municipal infrastructure that requires all municipalities have an asset management plan for their critical infrastructure and also a financially sustainable way to fund it. And like I said, many municipalities across Canada are moving towards these kind of funding models. Next slide. So at the beginning of this study, we started looking for guiding principles for the selection of the funding model. And these were worked on with the project team and based on best management practices and with input from the council, et cetera. And also what we're looking for input tonight from the public for. So these guiding principles are, is it fair and equitable? So is the fee non-discriminatory amongst customers and sectors and considers the financial impact of various customers and sectors? And does it actually have a correlation between how much runoff is coming from that properties? Is it affordable and financially sustainable? Is it justifiable? Residents and businesses will be able to understand the fee and why it's needed, how much is the fee, and understand how much the fee is and what the fee is being used for. And does the fee contribute to the climate change resiliency of the town? Does it encourage customers to be more resilient to climate change through on-site controls to reduce the stormwater runoff while providing the necessary funding for the stormwater infrastructure needs? And then is it simple to understand and to manage? Next slide. So We started the project back in October with a project initiation and background review. We looked at best practices that are happening in other communities. We looked at some fee option calculations. We've been talking about a credit program, but here and the fee evaluation. And we've talked about what the next steps will be for implementation. But underlining all of this is throughout this process is getting public information and education, giving you guys enough information that you can understand what the project's about and enough time to provide feedback along the way of all these tasks. So we're here in the public education and consultation piece. Our options. Right now, we're considering three main options. Option one is existing property tax system. A new tax levy could be created specifically for stormwater. Property owners would pay based on assessed value. The other option is a tiered flat stormwater fee. Property types would be divided into 3 tiers, and all properties within that tier would pay the same fee. Property owners would pay based on the average runoff area for that tier. And then the last option, option 3, is a variable stormwater fee based on stormwater runoff. Fees are based on the estimated stormwater runoff area of each individual property. Property owners will pay based on the measured runoff area from each property. So stormwater fee methods can also be combined and sort of mixed and matched as well for different property types, and we'll discuss that as well. Property types divided into these tiers. First of all, the high density residential tier, the high density residential property type group includes duplexes all the way up to sixplexes, townhouses, multifamily homes, and condominiums. Low density residential properties include single family detached, semi-detached, link homes, and farms are included there. Non-residential properties include parks, commercial places, industrial, institutional, government, mixed use, miscellaneous, and undeveloped. Calculated. Stormwater runoff is estimated using the development and engineering guidelines that the town has for stormwater design. And from those, we take a stormwater runoff coefficient. So for each different types of land use, we have a runoff coefficient. And it's a number between 0 and 1. And the closer it is to 1 basically means that all the water runs off. So you can see, for example, commercial and industrial, which would be mostly paved, are 0.9. So very high runoff coefficients, whereas parks, farms are 0. And then low density residential 0.7, high density residential 0.8. So that just gives us sort of an estimate, a good way of estimating how much runoff comes off a property as opposed to how much is absorbed. That runoff coefficient is then multiplied by the property area. So when you multiply the runoff coefficient by the property area, you get the runoff area. Next slide. So going back to these pie charts, we can see on the left, if we distribute the cost based on the existing tax method, we've got the non-residential and the high residential in the black and the blue respectively, and the low residential in the yellow. So on the left, you can see that through the taxes, low residential would be paying about 60%, or high residential 13%, and that non-residential at 27%. Based on a runoff area, we can see that much more of the runoff is coming from that non-residential properties in the black there, 56%, whereas 6% for the high density residential and 38% for the low density residential. So we've done all those calculations using the town's GIS data to figure all that out. So the chart at the bottom shows you approximately how much each of those groupings are paying through the tax method and through the runoff method. So next slide. So these slides are kind of busy, but I think they're very useful to provide some examples to tell you what these numbers would look like for each of these tiers. So let's first look at the high density residential grouping. So in a high density residential grouping, there's still lots of variety. You can have average townhomes, you could have condos and plexes. So we've chosen 3 properties to represent those just as examples. So because they're all in high density residential group, they all have the same runoff coefficient of 0.8. But they have very different property areas. So you can see the one on the left is a little over 200 square meters, and then you've got 126 square meters in the condo, and then 715 for the average plex. Of course, they all have different assessed values. The CVA, you've got a little over $500,000, a little under $500,000, and then over a full million on the right there. So let's see what the charges mean for these different properties. Based on property tax, so based on the assessed value, the property on the left, the average townhome, would be paying towards stormwater $193 annually, whereas the condo would be $142 and the average plex would be $341. For the tiered rate, they'd all be paying the same. They'd all pay the same in a tiered rate. They'd all be paying $57 a year. Whereas the variable rate would vary based on the size. They all have the same runoff coefficient, so it's really just varying based on size. So you can see the smaller property pays the least with $43, and the medium property $71, and the large property pays more at $240. Next slide. So let's walk through this again now with the low density residential group. So we've got some variations within this group as well. On the left, we've got the small single family home, in the middle, an average single family home, and on the right, a large family home. So because they're all low density residential, they all have the same runoff coefficient, 0.7. They had different areas. So the one on the left is 335 square meters. You've got over 1,000 square meters on the one in the middle, and 1,740 square meters on the one on the right. You wouldn't want to have to vacuum that one. The assessed values, of course, are different as well. The assessed value for the small single family home is just over $500,000. And then the average single family home is just under $2 million. And the large family home is valued at about $2.5 million. So under property taxes, they would contribute differently based on their assessed value. And you can see that in the top line, $215 a month towards stormwater annually, $331 a month, and $621 a month. But because they're all in the same tier, the low density residential, they would all pay the average rate. So they would all pay the same amount, $216 if we use the tier rate. And the variable rate would vary again based on property size. They would all have the same runoff coefficient, but based on property size, they would vary. So the small one would be at $99. The average size home would be $197, and the large one would be $309 a year towards stormwater. Okay, next one. Now this one's a little harder to understand because the property sizes can vary so differently. So for non-residential properties, so remember this is commercial, industrial sort of properties. So tend to be very high paved areas, a lot of parking lots and rooftops, very high runoff coefficient of 0.9. So they all have the same runoff coefficient. The property areas can vary dramatically with a little tiny mom and pop shop there on the left with 165 square meters. And then you've got a mid-sized commercial lot there, just over 8,000 square meters. And then you've got a very large commercial lot, 33,000 square meters. So really giant differences in sizes. And of course, the assessed value is different as well, just about $500,000, $4 million, and then over $14 million in the property values. So under property taxes, based on assessed value, they would pay small, medium, and large amounts. But the tiered fee, they would all pay the same because they're all non-residential properties. So they would all pay just under $3,000 a year annually towards stormwater. Now you can really see the difference here because the variable rate, they would be paying the smaller property, the variable rate's based on the size, only $73 a year. The middle one would be $3,064 a year, whereas the large one would be about $12,500 a year. So a really big size. So I hope that these examples can help see what we're looking at and why we are hoping to make this change and where it will be more equitable for certain cases. Let's look at the next slide. So this is a summary of what we've just looked at, just to remind ourselves of how much each of these property distribution groups are currently paying under the tax method, or would currently be paying under the tax method if we stayed with taxes based on assessed value. A tiered flat rate where they would pay all the same amount, and then a variable rate. So obviously the variable rate would change. So we've had to, for this summary, we've chosen sort of approximate areas for each of these. So there's the low density residential property is based on 660 meters. The high density is 160, and the non-residential property is over 8,000 square meters, just so we can get some numbers in there.
Tippy, can you just confirm, are these, the numbers that you shared, are these monthly or annual rates?
They're annual.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
I believe. I hope I'm saying that right. Please correct me if I misspoke. I think it's annual. Now you've got me second guessing myself.
They are all annual, but I think on one side you said per month at
Oh,
one
I'm
point.
sorry.
So I just
sorry.
wanted to make sure we are clear.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yes, I'm sorry. These are annual fees. All the fees I've shown so far, they're all annual fees. So they would be, most municipalities, when they move to this type of fee, choose to bill them monthly, but the fees that we're showing here are annual fees. Just quickly summarize the pros and cons, which are probably quite self-evident. So the option one, the property taxes, the property tax system, of course, it's easy to understand. It's probably acceptable, easy to administer. It's what you're already doing. So those are the pros. And you could designate funds to a stormwater levy. The cons, obviously, the property assessment doesn't correlate to property's runoff. There's a high distribution of residential payment coming from the residential properties, approximately 80 to 20%. Tax exempt properties or capped properties don't contribute. Annual budgets put a pressure to maintain minimal tax increases. There's a lot of competition for funds. And it's difficult to implement any kind of incentive program when you have taxes. So those incentive programs we'll talk about later too. And this would require quite a big tax increase to come up with the amount that we're looking for. Tier 2, option 2, next slide. So as we get more complicated, we get more equitable. So this would definitely be more equitable than for the residential properties than the tax system. There's a similar charge compared to the variable fees for residential properties with much less administrative effort. It's fairly simple to understand and easy to implement stormwater incentive programs. Both the flat and the variable fees result in lower fees for low and high density residential property owners versus the tax method. And the cons, it's unfair on small businesses. They'd be paying the same amount as large businesses and industrial properties. And there's a higher administrative cost than the current system. That's true. So let's look at the last one, pros and cons for option 3, the variable rate. So as we get more complicated, it becomes more equitable. So this is the most equitable option because we're really looking at measured rates and measured property sizes. So it's more fair for residential properties and non-residential properties. It's easy to implement incentive programs when you're using a variable rate. And it results in lower fees for small non-residential properties versus the tax method. So both the flat and the variable fees result in lower fees for low and high density residential property versus the tax method. The cons, obviously, this one's a little higher to administrate, especially to implement. It's a little more complicated to do that first run to make those calculations. But once it's up and running, it's not that much higher to actually administer on a day-to-day basis. The increased administrative costs to change are very similar for the residential properties compared to a tiered flat fee, and less than 20%, a $20 difference for significantly more administrative. So the next slide is a good summary of the evaluation that we've done. We've looked at those guiding principles and the different calculation methods, and we've done a quick evaluation. And we can see from this clearly that the variable method is the most preferred method based on the guiding principles. However, it does require the most effort to implement. So it's really all about finding the balance between asking for something to be more fair and equitable, but being more complicated to administer. So we've got the very easy to administer, but less fair and equitable on the left with the existing tax method. We've got a sort of lumped tiered flat fee in the middle, which is better and only a small amount more difficult to administer. And then one that's slightly more difficult to administer, but does provide more fair and equitability. Oh, and just to go back to that slide, I did want to say that, there is the option for mixing these options too. So you may be going with one for residential properties, for example, and another rate structure for ICI properties. I mean, that's always a possibility as well. Okay, I'm going to touch very quickly on incentive programs. I've mentioned them a few times here, and I'm just going to introduce them with a few slides today, and we will be gathering more feedback and talking more about incentive programs and subsequent public engagement. So many municipalities provide incentives to property owners by offering a credit, which is an ongoing reduction in their stormwater fee, or a rebate, which is a one-time reward for implementing on-site measures. Think of like getting a rain barrel paid for, or a site visit to help you install a rain garden. So it's the rebates are really a one-time fee, a one-time reward. So property owners who reduce their stormwater runoff or improve the quality of runoff from their property would qualify for credit or rebate, some sort of incentive program through the rate program. Next slide. So credits are for facilities that provide flooding and erosion protection, water quality treatment, or other environmental benefits for non-facility measures and activities that promote good housekeeping practices. Rain gardens, stormwater ponds, things like that. The required certification for these facilities have been that they're properly designed and installed and operated and maintained. So a stormwater pond is no good if it's full of sediment. It has to be cleaned out regularly and properly maintained. Same thing with oil grit separators underneath parking lots that clean the oil and grit out of the water before it flows to the storm sewers. And some require property access to allow inspection to municipal staff. So I always say the credits program is like a carrot instead of the stick. It gives them an incentive to do the things that really should be doing all the time anyway. Credits have a higher cost to administer and require applicants to complete a certification process. But for some clients, it can really mean a big reduction in their fee, especially if you're a commercial industrial customer paying a large fee for stormwater because you have a large paved area. Credits to reduce your fee are really popular. Rebates or subsidies are for property owners who implement measures like rain barrels or rain gardens, downspout disconnections, and backflow preventions. Credits would take the form of a one-time financial support payment. In-person how-to-do advisory services could also be provided, or published how-to information is often provided through the town or the Conservation Authority. And discounted prices for materials to construct rain gardens or rain barrels, permeable pavement, and that type of thing could also be provided through a rebate program. Rebates have lower costs to administer compared to credit programs. And again, the town might consider a combination of credits and rebates too. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Catherine to talk about the roadmap for the rest of the project. Thanks.
Thank you. So we've developed sort of a long-term plan to consider all of these options for the stormwater fee. The first stage really began back in June, where we were starting to focus on the education around what is stormwater, why is stormwater management important, why the town is looking at the different options to fund their stormwater needs. And then in phase 2 is when we really start looking at those different options as presented by Pippi, continuing to put it on the tax method versus moving towards a fee, what the benefits of both would be, and doing the analysis. And right now we are here in that stage of the round 2 of public engagement, where we're reaching out to different constituents and doing the survey online to get your feedback. The objective of this round is to really come to council with everyone's feedback and the analysis to make a recommendation on the type of fee model, or whether we leave it on the tax levy, and what that preferred option would look like, as well as how we might go about implementing. And then the intent is to go back out with some of those recommendations with a better idea of the proposed fee and what the impacts would be, and consult with the public and engage with more different groups to come back in April 2025 with our final recommendation of what those fees would be, and as well as how the implementation looks, as it will take a number of months to roll it out and create the new billing methodology. So next slide. So just the next steps that are in the near future, we're doing this virtual meeting as well. There's an in-person meeting tomorrow at Glen Abbey and a survey online. So we are doing our best to get as much feedback from everyone in Oakville as we can, so that we can consolidate that information and look at the analysis we've done as well, so we can present that preferred option in December 2024. And then we look forward to hosting a second round of those public meetings in early 2025, so that those final recommendations can be made.
Hey, it's back over to me. So as Catherine mentioned, the project team is seeking feedback into the stormwater funding options and the incentive program options at this point. So following this meeting, if you haven't already done so, we do invite you to visit oakville.ca and search stormwater fee to complete the survey. And to be clear, there are 2 versions of the survey, one for residential property owners and one for non-residential property owners. So the survey will be open and available until October 18th. So as Catherine also mentioned, an in-person public meeting is being hosted tomorrow evening, October 2nd, at the Glen Abbey Community Center on 3rd Line, and that will take place from 6 to 8 p.m. The meeting will include this presentation and a Q&A period. So it's very similar to what we've done today, but please do feel free to attend if you want to meet with the project team in person and speak with them one-on-one. Finally, an information session will be hosted specifically for non-residential property owners via Zoom on October 9th from 1 to 2:30 p.m. And you can find all of this information about the meetings and of course other information about the study in general on the project webpage at oakville.ca. Okay, so I'll leave this information up for the remainder of the meeting, but we do want to move into the question and answer period now. So we have had a number of questions come in throughout the meeting, and some related to the fee, some related to the amount required from the town, and of course the climate change as well. So I will try and group them where it makes sense. So the very first question that we had come in was related to climate change, and if somebody on the call can talk a little bit about how does the town prepare for climate change, given that the historical records don't accurately or don't necessarily capture climate change.
Uh, I can maybe start and then maybe hand it over. It is really tricky, but I know there are a lot of scientists out there doing a lot of work on climate change projections. So we do have access and availability to that data, and we use that as the basis of some of our studies. I can call on either Commissioner Fu or our Director of Transportation Engineering if they wanted to get into any specific details about how we actually do that and apply that lens.
Certainly, thank you, Catherine. So I'm Phoebe, I'm Commissioner of Community Infrastructure. Overall, the town has a climate action plan. And in that, stormwater is only one piece of the variety of things that we do to combat climate change. We have electrification of our buses. We are working with our building department to look at green development standards. We're certainly always working with our private folks to take a look at opportunities for green infrastructure on their side. And then specifically within the right-of-way for stormwater, we have been looking at everything from mitigating erosion, making sure all of our approvals and work that we do are mitigating the greater amount of rain and the more frequency of it. We do meet our standards in terms of how we calculate our stormwater needs. We look at the 100-year storm, as they call it. They don't happen every 100 year. They happen a lot more often. It's more about the level of and the volume of water that we're trying to handle. And we certainly try to mimic the water cycle by looking at green infrastructure, by letting the rain fall first, hopefully absorb into the ground, and then manage using engineering solutions for the water that cannot be managed through the natural green cycle, the water cycle. So those are a variety of things that we do actively to mitigate climate change.
So similarly, and maybe you've already touched upon this, but one of the questions was related to the value, so the stormwater needs. So the value presented for climate change is the 365 million, which is more than the state of good repair value of 351. So can you elaborate a little bit more on what kinds of projects or initiatives that this portion of the funding would pay for?
So I guess I can start off. So the majority of that 365 million is related to our stormwater master plan, which was done a few years ago. There's a lot of information on our website regarding the stormwater master plan, but essentially what that entails is looking at sort of those higher levels of storms and improving the stormwater infrastructure in the older built up areas of town. So sometimes you can imagine when you're going into an already established area of town, it's very costly to kind of dig up the infrastructure, and we're also expanding that infrastructure at the same time. So that can be quite costly. There also is a number of riverine studies, again, looking at flood impacts along the creeks and waterways there. And again, when you are working in the built up area, some of those solutions and that infrastructure can be quite costly. I don't know if you want to add on to any of that, Phoebe?
Yeah, I want to add one more thing. Stormwater design have progressed and changed many, many years to where we are today. So prior to 1980s, all those subdivisions or the older homes, typically south of QEW, they were not built to accommodate something to the level of the 100-year storm. So the ditches and if even you have sewers, they're only looking at 2 years, 5 years at most. So the overall stormwater design for those older areas are not because it was done before 1980s. There was no requirement at the time to design to meet a certain level. So all these years, as we progress past 1980s to now, the stormwater design is a lot more progressed, and that's what you see in the newer areas. You have stormwater ponds and retain back the water, and a number of main infrastructure to handle that. So the cost component of that, I'll call it the bucket, is to look at the older area of the town and bring them up to a certain levels of protection.
So there's a couple follow-up questions related to that. So, and I think this ties into the comment here. So the comment is going from 12.6 million per year to on average 24 million per year seems like a major cash grab. So is this large increase justifiable, and exactly where is the money going? So maybe you could respond to that.
Sure. I guess to start off, I'd like to clarify that the $24 million really just represents an average over the 30 years. As you can imagine, there's dozens and dozens of different projects. So the money that we need is fanned out over 30 years. So we would be looking towards our implementation plan at maybe gradually increasing our amount. From the current $12 million to the 24, so it wouldn't be a one-time jump to double the needs. But we do need the total of the 24 million if we want to ensure that we can continue to renew and maintain our current infrastructure, as well as make those climate adaptation improvements to help us become more resilient to those more frequent and intense storm events.
Okay, thank you. And then going back to the very first question that we had related to how the town prepares for climate change. There was some clarification in sent regarding sorry, I just lost it here. Yes. So regarding the question was about climate change scenarios. So perhaps how does the town take into account various climate change scenarios when preparing for climate change? Hopefully I've asked that question correctly.
Perhaps I may not be answering this correctly. I think I'm a bit, so there's the stormwater design. There's a typical standard that we calculate everything based on the 100-year storm. Around the riverine area, we calculate, we look at mitigation and flooding impacts due to the Hurricane Hazel storm. So there are engineering, I'll say, standards and levels where the stormwater professionals will take a look at what are the impacts based on these storms and the amount of rain and runoff. And then we will provide recommendations and designs accordingly through these studies. And to build on Catherine's point earlier, then these studies are actually on our website. All of these studies, all the riverine studies or stormwater master plan, they're all on our website with the recommendations for the variety of areas. And then we gather them and then group them to the total amount of dollars. And that's why we're developing the fee. I hope that answers it, but it's addressing the engineering design standards of the industry that we make sure we accommodate.
Okay, I think I've got another comment back, and I'm not sure it's exactly addressing it, but what I would suggest for who sent this, if you could follow up through the email address stormwaterfee@oakville.ca with your very specific question, and then the town can hopefully find the answer or get the information you're looking for. that's probably the best approach here.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Alicia. We can follow up on, I know they do a lot of modeling of different types of storm events. We have kind of sophisticated tools that help us do that. So maybe that's the type of answer this person's looking for. So we can follow up with the people that do that work.
Okay, great. So please do send that question out to the project email. Okay, so staying on the topic of the 30-year projections, there's a question related to inflation. So does the 732 million projection take into consideration inflation? And then there's another question as well, whether the town has estimated the program cost to administer a fee. Is that included in that estimation as well?
Sure, thanks, Alicia. So the $732 million is estimated in today's costs. I guess it does not account for the future costs of what something might need to be in, 10, 20 years from now. So the idea of this financial plan is similar to a number of different studies that we do, like a development charges study, for example, where you would estimate your costs for a period of time and then base your fee on that. But we recognize that costs will change over time, so we will repeat this exercise on a periodic basis, like every 5 years, for example, similar to other work that's done like this. With regards to the administration, I think there was an asterisk on that slide. The 732 million over the 30 years does include some cost to administer the program. We've estimated about 500,000 annually, and that would include a small team of staff to actually do the implementation of the capital program, as well as billing and administration of a new fee if that's the way we go.
Okay. Thank you, Catherine. We'll give you a bit of a break, perhaps here. So the next question that we have here is related to runoff coefficients and the fee. So why do all residential properties have the same runoff coefficient when they may have very different impacts on runoff and the ability to absorb a storm? So for example, a large home with a 2-acre lot would absorb most of its stormwater, whereas a smaller lot, say a 0.2 acre, would proportionately send more stormwater to the town's stormwater system.
I
So
can
Vicky,
answer
is
that.
something-
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so all cities and municipalities have engineering guidelines that estimate runoff coefficients for different property types, and they are estimates. They're based on averages. They're based on some calculations that are done for significant sort of sample size. So they are just that. They are estimates. You are correct to say that they're not all exactly the same, but they're based on averages and they are an estimate. So that's, I think, the best answer I can give.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so how much, there's a question related to property enhancements. So can the town secure favorable costs for property enhancements, economies of scale for specific changes? And I'm wondering if that's related to perhaps rebates. If there's any clarification you'd like to add to that question, please send it in. But I'll put that question out there to the team here. So can the town secure favorable costs for property enhancements, economies of scale for specific changes?
I can answer that if you like. I think it's pretty common for municipalities to bulk buy certain things like paving stones or rain barrels and that kind of thing. So that can give them better prices for those types of things, if that's what you mean. So a lot of municipalities do implement those kind of programs. Does that answer the question?
If it hasn't answered your question, please just send a follow-up note here. Okay, the PowerPoint slide deck available on the town's website. So we are recording the meeting, and the plan is to put the meeting recording online. We'll certainly talk to the team there to see about getting the slide deck as well. This is related to developers. So how much of the burden for increasing stormwater management will be passed to the developers of new properties who may have taken away water absorbing land and put on significant hardscape? This question applies to new developments applied to Midtown too. So I'm not sure. Phoebe would. Phoebe,
Yeah, so the fee would go to the property owner, not necessarily the developer. So the onus on the developer would be when they're applying for a site plan approval through the municipality, they would have to show any changes not in the impervious area per se, but for these options, they would have to change if there was a land use change that would affect how the fee was going to be calculated. But the fee is paid by the owner, not necessarily the developer.
I could also add that for all development applications, whether it's Midtown or North Oakville, they have to conduct stormwater studies and they have to maintain pre and post, as we call it. So for example, if they has a runoff, a certain amount of stormwater before development, they cannot make it worse in terms of having more runoff after development. They have to then have different technical solution through that plays into their design to ensure that the development doesn't have a worse effect from before. So it's actually part of the engineering standards and our development approval process that all development have to go through.
Thanks, Phoebe. Does the town take into account that many older neighborhoods are undergoing house rebuilds, usually with much larger footprints and higher impervious surfaces? So this would lead to higher runoff rates. Will the variable rate differentiate between impervious surfaces in the same neighborhood?
So the options that we're looking at will not account for that. The options that we're looking at, the most accurate one would measure the area, but it would use the runoff coefficient for that property type, and there would be some fluctuation in the amount of impervious area within that property type. So it's not perfect, but it's more accurate because at least it's based on area and some sort of runoff coefficient. So these kind of studies are often redone over the years and updated every sort of 5 years, they could look at reassessing their runoff coefficients. For example, if the town felt that there was an increase in general towards more buildup or more impervious area in a certain property grouping, they could maybe think about updating their the runoff coefficient for that group in the future. But for now, no, it's still an estimation, and that's definitely still an area of inequity between properties, but it would be very small. Like if you're talking about residential properties and one house, is contributing more than the other house, there's still only, even if you did it with a very finite lens, and measure the impervious area and then put it through these sort of rates that we're talking about, the difference would be very small for residential properties. We're talking dollars a month. So that kind of analysis isn't really warranted for small properties. It's really more important for those very large industrial properties where if you have an industrial property and it happens to have a lot of grassed area, well, they're going to want that to be incorporated, and that's going to make a very big difference in their price. So that would be more worthwhile, if you know what I mean. So, but you're right. Like if you've got a nice, beautiful garden that's green, and your neighbor has decided to pave over their garden, it's pretty frustrating. And there's other ways that the municipality could maybe approach that through education or other incentive programs. But yeah, no, these programs that we're looking at don't have that fine ability to differentiate between those.
Okay, thanks, Pippi.
Great. I was just going to add to that too, depending on where that, the first part of the question was about replacing small houses on big lots with big houses on big lots. And depending on where that's happening, they may also be required to fulfill the same types of analysis and work that Phoebe described for larger developments. So managing some of their stormwater on site. So and before, to get back to that pre to post analysis that Phoebe mentioned. So that's one way that they would be dealing with it. It's not related to the fee itself, but it is about the management of the stormwater.
Okay, thank you, Jill. Going back to funding options, has the city of Oakville considered funding from other sources, including new development builders and provincial federal resources, as they were requiring condensed living requirements above what the existing infrastructure was developed for?
Certainly have looked at alternative funding resources. Particularly, we're actively seeking grants that whether it's provincial or federal government has issues for a variety of our improvement projects. In terms of the development, the developers pay for them to develop in Oakville, and then they have to, as I mentioned, they have to make sure that they pay for the infrastructure that they need in order to develop. As Pippi mentioned, this is a fee for the town-wide for everyone who have, I guess, touches on stormwater to participate on the overall town-wide improvement and increase our climate resiliency.
Thank you. Related to just going to incentive programs now. So does the town plan to offer incentives to property owners to reduce water runoff through rebates or tax credits?
I can answer that if you like. I think the town is considering it, certainly. And there'll be more consultation in the next phase of this project. As we move forward, we'll be considering the financial incentive program options, and we'll be going out to public to consult on that separately.
Okay, thank you. And then going back to the earlier question related to economies of scale. So the question is, if there are a number of property owners who want to hire a landscape company or a paving company, can a lesser cost be secured by the town? Does the town have that ability to negotiate those kinds of deals?
We certainly recognize that there will be benefit when a group of folks get together and make these improvement plans, but it will be through either the credit or the incentive programs that we'll take a look at. The town would not be engaging in, I'll say, opportunities for contractual arrangements on behalf of the residents, unfortunately.
Can someone speak to whether the 4% of tax that normally would fund the stormwater program, would that change or stay the same?
Yes.
It's difficult to estimate because that 4% of the tax is based off of what our total property tax is today. And as you are aware, costs for the other services also increase as well. So it's I think it would stay around 4 or 5% approximately, depending how quickly the rest of the property tax base grows. Not sure if I answered that question. There's no easy answer.
Okay, if there's a follow-up question to that, please send it over.
For sure.
Can or do non-residential fees, so I'm assuming non-residential stormwater fees, account for the environmental costs of their harmful runoff? So effluent, oil runoff, industrial effluent, things like that.
So the credit and rebate programs can address water quantity. So if you take that peak off the flow coming off your property, but also water quality. So typically, most of the big industrial commercial properties would have oil grit separators underneath their properties, underneath the parking lots. And would need to be cleaned out regularly. So in order to qualify for the credit program or the rebate for the credit program in this case, they could apply for it with infrastructure they already have. So if they already have a stormwater management pond on their property or an oil grit separator, for example, they just need to show that they have it and here's the design and here's the date it was installed. But to maintain that credit, they would need to show year by year that it's being properly maintained, et cetera. So if the design said it need to be cleaned out every 5 years, you need to show that it's being cleaned out every 5 years. For residential rebates, there's other, things like a rain garden, for example, does filter out oil and grit and is quite good at cleaning runoff from a property. So something small like that would provide a cleaning of the stormwater runoff from those properties. So, and that could be incentivized through a rebate program or a credit program. So that's kind of the advantage to going with these programs. Like I was saying, it's a carrot instead of a stick, that you're really incentivizing people to do the kinds of things that we would hope people want to do anyway, but this gives them that extra incentive.
Okay, thanks, Pippi. Okay, so has the pre and post development no change impact regarding water drainage been considered while developing north of Dundas, or is this a new policy being implemented prospectively? It seems like the developers north of Dundas should have paid a higher fee that went into this water drainage development fund. So was this a lack of foresight, and now the taxpayers are left on the hook?
Thanks, Alicia. So as part of the development planning for North Oakville, there was a comprehensive plan developed for all of the areas to look at both stormwater quantity and stormwater quality. So how much water was going to run off and need to be stored or treated, and how we would address the quality of that stormwater. Each of the developers is responsible for contributing to that overall plan, because stormwater doesn't respect necessarily the development boundaries. So the plan was built based on looking at where that stormwater would run to, and then each developer has a contribution to that. So that deals with putting the new infrastructure in place to manage the pre-development flows and make sure that the post-development flows match that. And that's why you will see things like the stormwater management ponds that are in that area. They've all been sized based on the 100-year storm, as Phoebe mentioned in an earlier question, and the amount of runoff that will come from those new developments to that area.
Okay, thank you, Jill.
Hopefully that addresses that question.
So once the stormwater funding study is over and the final recommendation is made and implemented, can you confirm that a portion of the funds will be used to assess the older infrastructure south of the QEW and make significant improvements? So more specifically, do you know if the town will take a closer look at the current infrastructure around Lakeshore Road and Third Line, where there was a significant sewer backup leading to flooding of many houses in the Coronation Park neighborhood back in July?
Let's just.
I guess I was gonna
Go ahead.
I was gonna suggest that more or less the answer to that question is yes. The $360 million related to the climate adaptation improvements in large part are related to that stormwater master plan, which does address some of the stormwater management needs down in the south of Oakville, as well as the I think we've also included some of the Coronation Park study works. I think I failed to mention in the beginning our report that we brought to council in July 2023, which is available on our Stormwater Feasibility Study page, does have a breakdown of all of the different studies and types of infrastructure needs and the different quantities. So that might provide you a little bit more information as to what specific projects and types of work are included.
I just want to add that the stormwater studies are different than the wastewater studies. So in terms of if there's sanitary basement flooding due to sanitary overflow, that is under the responsibility of the region. And we work with them on a regular basis for, I'll say, key areas. If there are combined issues that we could work together on. And lastly, as you would imagine, this is a 30-year plan, as Catherine mentioned before. We will need to prioritize in terms of the different areas to look at the detailed study. So the answer is definitely yes. There's always going to be detailed studies beyond the environmental assessments and then I'll say the master plan level studies in order to get us into detailed design and subsequent to construction. But please recognize that there will be an order of priority that we have to work through for the entire south of Oakville and other challenges in different areas as well.
Thank you, Phoebe and Catherine. So we just have one, it's more of a comment here than a question, I think, more of a concern. So when thinking about option 3, the variable rate, so whether it's grocery stores, Home Depot, movie theaters, restaurants, etc., there's a question around wouldn't these businesses just transfer these costs to the consumers, so the residents? So I think there's some concerns about that. I'm not sure if anyone has any comments to respond back, but we can leave it at that, I think. So thanks for that comment. So we have a couple of tax-related questions, tax-related questions. So if the 732 million is raised for the rainwater management plan using any of the fee models discussed here, will property taxes decrease by this amount or remain the same? So is the 732 million in addition to normal taxation?
So I can take a stab at that one for you first, Alicia. So the number that was identified there includes some items that are currently in our budgets, but some that aren't. So I think what the question is getting at is will taxes go down as a result of this? And the easy answer to say, but the hard one to realize is that it's possible. We certainly will present this as part of our approach with council, but council is ultimately the ones who decide on our budget as well. So that will be a variable we'll consider along with all of the other capital and operating requests that we have each year.
Okay, thank you. We currently have one more question in the queue here. So please, as I'm asking this, if there's any other questions you have for this evening, please send them along. So as a fellow finance professional, have we scrubbed all the department budgets to identify resources which can be reallocated to this new stormwater fund? It seems highly questionable that we need another tax on top of a similar tax already built into our existing property tax when property values have increased significantly over the past 10 years and in relation the respective property taxes. So I want to ensure that the town has done its due diligence instead of simply implementing an easy out tax.
So I can tackle that one too, Alicia. So we're actually going through our budget process right now, and we certainly want to ensure that we're doing a good job with our taxes and any tax increase that we put in front of council for them to decide on. So we do work very closely, very diligently with all of our departments to ensure that the budgets we present are reasonable, that they don't have anything in there that we don't need. So that would probably answer the first part of that question. And then the other part I would just say is there were some questions in there related to assessment and property values and things like that. And we have lots of public consultation coming up in our budget process. So as a finance professional, I'm just going to put that little plug in there to come on out to our budget meetings as well. We can answer some more of those questions there.
Thanks for that, John. I just want to add to that as well. I think part of the reason why we're looking at shifting to a different model for collection of stormwater needs is, as we saw in some of the previous slides, that just putting it on the tax base is not necessarily equitable or fair to all different types of taxpayers. When we compare how the tax base is funded, the burden gets put, over 70% of it is paid by the residential property taxes, where we know that the stormwater runoff contributions are coming primarily more from the non-residential. So if we continue to just kind of increase our taxes to fund some of these additional stormwater needs, then we're maybe not necessarily putting the burden on the right property owners. So that's one of the primary reasons for looking at it in a different light. There will be some work to kind of understand how we're shifting it off of the tax base and into a different type of form of fee. But that's really what the objective of this exercise is.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. And that's probably a good spot to end for the evening. We're almost out of time and we don't have any other open questions at the moment. So we will wrap up now. So thank you so much for attending. As a reminder, please do visit the study webpage at oakville.ca and search Stormwater Fee to complete the survey by October 18th. You can also visit the webpage to access details for tomorrow evening's in-person public meeting, or of course, register for the information session for non-residential property owners. If you do have any other questions or comments following this meeting, please do feel free to reach out to the study team at stormwaterfee@oakville.ca. And do note that all of your questions and comments have been recorded for this evening. So thank you so much again, and we really appreciate your input and the time that you've taken to learn more about this study. So have a good evening, everyone.